You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
I'm back. Hello everybody. It's been ages since I last got to talk with you all. Before Christmas, in fact, nearly a month ago. I took a little bit of a break from the podcast, not because I missed you all. Thanks, Kerry. I've actually just done them, believe it or not. Yeah, but you can do them again. Don't worry. You know, spread the love. Spread the love. Yes, I've missed you all. How is everybody? I hope you're all well. I hope you've all been up to lots of exciting things. And I've got lots of exciting things planned for 2019. It's been a bit of an interesting year already for me, if I'm honest. We had the Daily Mail article on the New Year's Eve. Then I was on Paul Ross's talk radio show a week or so later. I've got some articles being published. We've got some cracking shows lined up for you on Haunted Histories. There is just so much going on. So much going on. But without much further ado, I've got a good hour's worth of interview with you and discussion on the quite remarkable and slightly terrifying Countess Bathory. So do let me know what you think. And hello everyone. Well, firstly, I am very, very glad to be back on my first Haunted History show of 2019. And I'm even more happy to be joined by a very special guest. Now, we're talking about Countess Bathory, however you want to pronounce it, and most people have heard of her. Most people have heard of her as being she bathed in the blood of virgins. She's meant to have killed over 600 young girls. She's known as the greatest serial killer in history. But there's not many people that can say they've actually visited the castle that she was reputed to have been bricked up in for the last 4 years of her life. But there are some people, and I just happened to be good friends with one of them who's visited there. All the way from Sydney, Australia, it's only Beth Darlington. How are you doing, Darlo?
I'm doing wonderfully, lovely, Penny. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. All the best for talking to you, my love. I couldn't decide whether to call you Darlo or Betho. I went with Darlo.
Darlo is what they call me at work, so I'm more than happy to be referenced as that. That's completely fine. That's great.
I'm trying to put you at ease, make you feel at home, put the O on at the end of everything, like the Aussies like to do.
We all shorten everything because we're too lazy.
So, what have you been up to, my lovely, before we start talking about...
lots of different things. It's the beginning of 2019, lots of planning, I've got my first investigation weekend coming up, all that kind of stuff. So, lots of all that kind of stuff, lots of online learning, and obviously sharing that information out and helping everybody out as well. So, it's just been great. It's going to be a fabulous year.
It's looking that way. I must admit, it's quite busy for me already. So it is looking like my feet aren't going to be touching the ground this year. But you got to meet some friends of mine last year, didn't you? When you went to Kentucky.
I did. I got to catch up with the Tennessee Wraith Chasers, who know me as their Australian experience. So every time they see me, they look at me and they just know, it's the Aussie chick. So they were there, as I said, great team, great guys, very down to earth, beautiful people, and was able to do a paranormal investigation with them and also the Ghost Brothers as well. And equally as charming and funny too. Yeah, it was just such a great experience. It almost got to the point where it didn't really matter if there was anything there from a paranormal perspective. It was just being around and talking and learning and chatting with these guys as well. They're really just very into it and just very laid back and so much fun.
I do get into trouble with their accents though, because their accents make my knees go, especially when they call me ma'am.
Yeah. You're not sure if you should be like offended or just kind of like happy.
Oh no, I love it. They yeah. I did when I think it was Dalen I was interviewing, and my husband was sitting in listening in on the interview, and he just put me a note and said, "Stop flirting." I can't help it. It's the accent. It's just so. Oh, yeah.
Don't get me started.
Oh, don't. I was, I'm in trouble, especially when someone says, "Oh, I've got someone for you to interview. Where are they from?" Texas. Oh, no.
I know, it's like, okay.
I would like to get over to Nashville at some point and go partying with the Tennessee boys.
Oh, it'd be brilliant. What an experience.
It would be good, wouldn't it? It would be good. Maybe one day if I win the lottery. But, I mean, you've been to Europe quite a few times.
Yes.
You're part English?
Yes, I am. I am half English, half Australian. Top half, bottom half, yes.
So you do get over it quite a lot, because you don't have to worry about the whole passport rubbish.
At the moment, yes.
At the moment, yeah, who knows what's going to happen. I might be moving to Australia, you never know.
Hey, people.
I do. I'll be turning up on your doorstep at some point, Beth. Go, give me a sofa. Yeah, we won't talk about that one. Oh dear. Anyone who's listening who doesn't actually know what Beth and I are talking about, who's not from the UK, we're talking about Brexit, the whole thing of the UK coming out of the EU and the whole crap fest that's coming because of that. Mm-hmm. But you've been to Hungary, haven't you? And
yes.
Remind me, what was the name of the show that you recorded? Because you did Chernobyl.
It was. Yes, and it was all in the same show. It's called Ghosts of Europe, and it's available on Amazon if you do search for it. And we also in that particular episode, obviously, or in that particular series, we actually went up to and drove through Hungary to Slovakia, and of course that's where this famous location is.
Which at the time when she was around, it was actually classed as Hungary, though, wasn't it?
Yes.
It became Slovakia subsequently when all the borders keep getting jigged around. But what we're actually talking about is the castle that was Elizabeth Bathory's home after married life.
Yes. Yeah.
Now it's kind of a ruins, isn't it? It's not sort of a big. There's bits of it there, but it's pretty much a ruins. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Now, how long did you spend there?
We had one night, only one night, 1 day and 1 night in total.
Okay. Well, let's have a quick look at Bathory, because most people don't think of her as she's kind of classed almost as a female vampire sometimes as well, because one of the things when they started writing up her history, it was the same sort of time they were starting to look at things like Vlad the Impaler, and it's funny that when we in the West were worrying about witches and all that kind of thing, Eastern Europe, I'll call it Eastern Europe to show the difference, we're more worried about vampires. So Bathory came at the right time because of the whole blood connection, which we're going to talk about in a second. But she was born into quite a wealthy family. At the age of 10, she was betrothed to 15-year-old Francis Nadasdy, who she did actually end up marrying about 3.5 years later. Now, as was the tradition then, she didn't take Francis's surname. She kept hers. She kept hers as Bathory. And what's quite interesting is that her parents were actually first cousins. So they do actually believe there's a certain element of, how do I put this politely, inbreeding had gone on. So there may have been some genetic abnormalities due to that, which is why in some accounts she's said that she had something called falling sickness. Do you know what falling sickness is, Beth?
No, I've not heard this.
It was the medieval term for epilepsy.
Oh, Get Out. Really? So, of course, yeah, I've heard that she did have what they would have said was present-day epilepsy, but I didn't realise that was the term.
It was known as falling sickness. I don't know why, but that's what the
Mm.
medieval term for it was. Now, what's even more interesting, especially when we start talking about what, if for anyone who doesn't know what Elizabeth was meant to have done, and I'll say meant to because I'm still not 100% sure she did, in the way that the articles now say she did. But one of the cures for epilepsy was to rub the blood of a non-sufferer on the lips of the person fitting.
Wow, that's intense.
It's intense, but it's also interesting when you start to look at what the myths about her said. I thought it was interesting anyway when I'm starting to see connections. So they believe possibly it's never been documented anywhere that she suffered from it. It was more from reports about her. But then again, you didn't really have doctors back in the 1500s, because bear in mind she was born on the 7th of August 1560. So you didn't have doctors back then. You wouldn't have had... It would have been in sort of almost like local folklore that she suffered from it. But they do believe that possibly it was to do with the genetic abnormalities of the fact her parents were first cousins, and who knows what could have manifested. But yeah, so she married Francis at the age of, it was about 13 or 14, and by all accounts they were very happy together. He was away fighting a lot, and what was in, they had 5 children, 3 of whom survived to adulthood, but she didn't have her first child for 10 years after she was married. And a lot of the rumours about her say that's because she had an illegitimate child at the age of 14 with a local peasant boy. There is absolutely no proof of this. Another one said that she was actually a lesbian, and that's why she wouldn't sleep with Francis to have his child. Possibly she was bisexual, I don't know. But one of the main logical things is saying, hang on, he was away fighting for 19 years of their marriage. So the window they would have had to get pregnant was quite small. Could it not have just been it was wrong place, wrong time for 10 years?
Yeah.
It's possible. It's possible. It's also possible that she hadn't reached puberty at the age of 13, 14. That might not have happened for a couple of years. But anyway, so there's all the people saying, oh, she was this, she was that. That's the proof. Because she didn't have children straight away. Yeah, I think that's a load of rubbish, to be quite honest. It was just, he was away for 19 years of their marriage fighting the Turks. Now, when you and I know your sister was one of the team, wasn't it? When you went to visit the castle, Beth, what were your initial thoughts about Bathory? What she was like?
I purposely didn't want to do a lot of research because I wanted to go in with a clean slate as much as possible.
Yeah.
I knew that there was a person that was named that. I didn't want to go into the full history, so I actually went in pretty much with no background at all. I'm finding that sometimes when I do paranormal investigations that having the least amount of historical information for myself going in and being an investigator, it's really challenging because when you try and do EVP sessions, it's really hard to ask questions that you don't know about, background of history, but it really does push you. But secondly, whatever I'm going to get or whatever I'm going to hear or understand or what's going to come through, I'm not going to suddenly sit there and attribute to something from the past that I'm, obviously that sort of confirmation bias type thing. So with this, but even with this, something, having traveled so far, having gone to such a beautiful location and going to a location like this and with the history that it had, I hadn't had previous knowledge of Elizabeth prior to this. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't still have that. So I could go with fresh eyes and just see how it went and roll with it, sort of thing. So I think I was probably at the time when I walked up to that beautiful ruin and seeing what it was, just appreciate the actual building and the history, whatever history it was at that time. Originally, that's what it was.
Yeah. Well, I must admit, until I started researching for this show, I didn't know much about her at all. I certainly didn't know the information that I've got written down as notes in front of me. And I also didn't know quite how powerful she was. The sort of the folklore about her is that she would bathe in the blood of, well, let's go back a bit. So her husband's away fighting the Turks. And if anyone wants to read up on what the history of the area, there's words like tripartium that you'll see, and the fact that the whole area was kind of split into 3 parts, and one part said you can live here but you have to pay us a levy to live here, and all this kind of stuff. Typical medieval sort of shenanigans going on. But I'm not going to go that far into the history, because if it's something you're interested in, looking at Eastern Europe back in the medieval times, that's up to you. It's, you know, I'm not going to teach you all about that just now. But basically, they were off fighting the Ottomans or the Turks. In fact, they would have been Ottomans then, not Turks, but the Ottomans, the Turks, as they're now known. And Francis her husband was, by all accounts, a very dedicated and loyal soldier. But whenever he went away, he would leave the estate to Elizabeth to manage. Now, Elizabeth herself was raised in a noble family, the Bathorys. Her cousin was, I believe, the King of Poland as well. So there was an awful lot of nobility in the family tree. It wasn't just centred on Hungary and Slovakia and those sort of areas. She was fluent in many languages, Latin, Greek, various other things. Her parents were Calvinists, and so they believed in schooling. They believed in education for boys and girls. So she was intelligent. She was well schooled. She was also apparently meant to be very good at holding an argument in court. Not court as in your guilty court, but like the royal, the regal court. That she was very good at having conversations, holding her own in an argument, holding her own in a heated conversation, shall we say, which back then was not normal for women. You know, women were meant to be more sort of seen and not heard in raising the children, but I would say Elizabeth was more than that, a lot more than that. And so she was quite unpopular because of she wasn't the kind of woman who wouldn't say boo to a goose. She had an opinion. I think looking at her now, she'd probably be running a country when you look at what she was capable of. There's a few women like that I've discovered during history. Queen Isabella, who was married to Edward II, she was another one of those. Was very sort of educated, clever, and could have been in quite a good position of power given the chance. But bear in mind, even through that time, there were women in power. You've got Queen Elizabeth in the UK around that time. You've got all that kind of thing going on. But she was meant to be a bit aloof. She was a noble, and that's how she acted. Servants were servants, noble was noble. There was no sort of meeting in the middle. I'll say she had 5 kids. 3 of them survived to adulthood. Paul was her oldest boy, who would then inherit the estate of his father, Francis, when Francis died. I remember from watching your film on this that the castle is on the top of a hill, as most castles tend to be, and it's got an amazing view over the surrounding villages, I suppose, for a better term. Does it make you feel kind of regal when you're in it and looking down? Does it kind of add to that whole nobility sort of looking down on people? Does that make sense, Beth? Absolutely makes sense.
When you visit beautiful places like this, even though they are in such a ruined, we say ruined state, obviously it's you haven't got the furnishings or anything like that. There's no roof. It's all literally just sort of is semi-rubble, if you want to call it that, although there's quite a bit still there. As far as that, you do have an appreciation for the location of where it's been built. And I mean, the views were incredible. Like I even just whatever windows and little sort of slits of windows were left behind. When you look through them, you're actually like, someone has looked through this hundreds and hundreds of years ago before me, and it still looks beautiful. It would look beautiful on a summer's day. It would look beautiful on a winter's day. It just looks incredible, and the land all around and the vantage point, like. having the way this particular structure for her castle that she lived in most of the time was built was in such a great spot. Like, it's so stunning to be able to walk around and have a look and see, just, you have such an appreciation of where it was actually, and also, as I said, like you can understand why it was built there, having gone to the village and been and stayed in the village overnight prior to that, being able to actually, walk up this trail all the way up, and it's a bit of a walk, and you walk all the way up. Some people drive, that's fine, it's cool. I went high. We were hardcore. We actually walked all the way up, and it's just, you can appreciate the fact that it's there and that its location is just an incredible spot, and the views were just beautiful. And so, of course, having what little knowledge I had, I thought, obviously there's this person called Elizabeth who was here. She had done something bad, being somewhat, semi-entombed here, if you want to call it that. Hey, not bad views. But then again, back in the day, when it came to medieval times, you weren't thinking about the views like we do here in modern times. So I'm sure it doesn't matter about the views, I'm stuck here kind of stuff. But it was just, it is an exquisite place to go and visit when it comes to that. Very traditional in that way.
So you're saying you stayed actually in the village. Did
Yes.
anyone in the village have any opinion on the whole Bathory scandal?
Well, we had dinner at one of the local places, and it's almost like in the particular area it's funny because from what I remember from researching afterwards, she once she was found to be guilty of her things, which we'll go into. There was this thing of not to speak of her of sort of like almost 100 years. You wouldn't know that when you walk into the village. There is a lot of reminiscence about her. There's a statue about her. I even have a fridge magnet that's in my office that is a picture of her that I bought at a local restaurant sort of thing. So it's kind of like they almost celebrate the fact that she had been there, she had survived there, she had this story about her, because it brings people to that location. And it brings tourism and stuff like that. So it's they're very welcoming about it, and you do see references of her around town, which was kind of interesting because it's almost like in Australia what we have is a well-known convict type guy called Ned Kelly.
Yes.
For those in Australia, yes. So it's almost a bit like that. So this person has done so much bad, but yet here's a town that celebrates it regardless. Yeah. And I could make that reference when I was there. Yeah.
I think that's interesting when that happens, because when I was doing the research on it, there was still an awful lot of people sort of sending messages into the websites that talked about her, saying you're glorifying what she did, you're making money off her. But it kind of goes to prove the old adage, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Yep. Yeah.
Whether she did it or not. And I'll be honest with you, I actually don't think she did to the extent that people are saying she did, but I'll get on to that, I will. But it's interesting to see that the village are maximising their resources, shall we say?
Yes.
I'd just be interested to know if they thought she did it, or whether it's just been handed down through the generations that she did it. You don't question it. But it's The thing is, there's a lot of parts of Eastern Europe that are just absolutely stunning, and nobody realises that because all they see is the Iron Curtain, the old Cold War side of things, the communist side of things, and they don't realise how truly beautiful some of the more sort of the medieval and Gothic-y parts of Eastern Europe are. But so she was married. She was married for quite a long time. I mean, they, by all accounts, they were happy. The affairs thing, the fact they were both meant, her and her husband, well, they say she was the adulteress. There's actually proof that Francis was as well. But that's nothing unusual in medieval times for the nobility. Most nobility, men and women, took extracurricular activities on, shall we say. That wasn't unusual. It wasn't unusual. It was only if I think the man got annoyed with it, the women doing it as well, he could then file for sort of action to be taken. But he was away a lot, leaving her on her own, so she took companions. Who are we to judge? One of those was meant to be, from the lesbian perspective, was meant to be her Aunt Clara, who was also meant to be a murderess, a witch, and a sex addict. There is absolutely no proof of this in any of the records, but that's one of the rumours that gets spread about Bathory. But what I don't think there's any question about Elizabeth was she was very vain. She was very vain. She's meant to have changed her clothes 2 or 3 times a day to look good. She would have been perceived in today's terms as being very cruel because she abused her noble power. But looking at the clothes change, they didn't really take baths back then, and looking clean the whole time was expected of the nobility because you had an image to portray to the underlings. So if her clothes got dirty, she would change them into something else. And the fact they weren't bathing. Another thing as well, there was a report saying she was always dousing herself in lavender perfume. Well, that doesn't surprise me. If you don't bathe, you're going to do something to try and maintain a kind of nice sense. So a lot of the things that are thrown about it, saying how obnoxious she was, can be quite easily argued. Well, actually, if you look at the situation then. So time has progressed, and in 1604, Francis died. You and I were talking about this off air because you were saying one of the rumours that had been gone around was that it was unexplained, his death.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What do you think?
It's hard to say because we're talking, like you said, we're talking about a history that's hundreds and hundreds of years old. So, I mean, they say he died of mysterious illness on the battlefield, and then you'll dig somewhere else and they'll say, he had a pre-existing illness before he died, and it's kind of like, well. And so people say mysterious illness. In other words, it was almost like insinuating the fact that he was meant to die, or something. There was some sort of this is almost exactly this is exactly this kind of thing. It's like, why if the situation's great and things are awesome, why would you go and do that? So it's the way in which it's been portrayed and given. It's very sketchy. There's people saying, out on field or when he came home. I've got two different sides of it personally when I've actually been looking at it. So I'd be interested to find out what you've actually come across.
Okay, well, what I found, and I've corroborated it with other sources, was that in around, I think it was 1601 or 1602, he came down with a mysterious illness that rendered him paralysed from the waist down, and he was bedbound for a short while. He did recover from that and went back to battle. He was very, very close to the then king, Matthias II. In fact, Francis was so close to Matthias, when the king had run out of money to keep fighting the Ottomans, the Turks, and Francis lent him quite a bit, on the understanding it would be paid back, and if something happened to him, it would certainly be paid back for Elizabeth and the children. In 1604, and I believe it was something like it was quite late in 1604, he had returned from battle, but he was ill again. Some of the reports say it was this paralysis had returned. Some say he just died in his bed, exhausted, and that he'd never quite recovered from whatever it was before. But there was no cause of death given. Again, it's 1604. They didn't do autopsies back then. They didn't know diseases that we know now, and diseases that we probably don't know now, but we'll know in 100 years' time. As I said to you, so I was being a bit flippant, I found no proof of this, but he could have been bitten by a tick in the battlefield and developed Lyme's disease or something. We don't know. We don't know, but if Elizabeth had poisoned him, that would have gone against her supposed killer MO. And also, as you say, why would she kill someone who she was quite happy with and who left her to her own devices? Doesn't make sense to me, because she didn't go off with anyone else after he died. So I would say it's literally the fact he'd spent 19 years fighting. That's a long time to be fighting constantly.
Yeah.
He was exhausted, possibly, or maybe he'd contracted something whilst away. He could even have had flu for all we know, and that could have killed him. But I think it was just a sign of the times, and his luck had run out. But I found that he actually died in the castle, at the castle that you guys visited. That's what I found.
Wow. Okay.
But again, a lot of this is, a lot of it is conjecture, because you can't. There's no sort of firm records from the time. You're reading sort of, And what I found when I was starting to research it, that brilliant thesis I said I was reading, the actual stories of her having an illegitimate child, being a lesbian, being an adulteress of the worst possible kind, didn't actually start until somebody called von Ellsberg released a book in 1904. So sort of nearly 300 years after she died. And his book was basically based on folklore and peasant stories. Now, a lot of the stories the peasants were giving were going to be nasty because she was seen to be this killer of their young women. So, I don't know, but I read that her husband died in 1604, and it was due to illnesses that he'd contracted previously, and I think his time had run out. But one of the reasons that people give for her being accused of what she did, which we're going to come on to, is because she was a female and she was very powerful and she had loads and loads of money. She was richer than the Habsburg court, which was King Matthias II's court. I would counter that because the fact when she died, her estate, well, Francis's estate went to their son Paul, and she was just administering it on his behalf. So it wasn't her money. The only money she had was the money she was owed by King Matthias and the castle itself. So, who knows? Who knows? Now, does the castle feel nasty? Does it feel like loads of violent deaths occurred there? Does it feel malevolent?
Well, like with most haunted locations or semi-reportedly, haunted locations, it felt as soon as the sun went down, it had a different atmosphere to it. There were certain aspects and certain parts of it, and I don't want to go too much into it because you will need to watch it and stuff like that. But the program itself and the show itself, but there were certain parts of it that changed, and I'm not somebody who would ever consider themselves psychic in any way. Like I'm about as psychic as the chair I'm sitting on. Literally, the chair has more psychic ability than I do. Like, literally, that's it. It's that's where it ends. But even for me, I found things that and that's another thing I find is good about not knowing the full history of a location going into it, that if there's things that you may sense or pick up as human, not necessarily just as a psychic and or a medium, but just being a human being, that I found out later I was actually spot on and not realizing that I was at the time. So there was one section that people were kept that were apparently that were treated unwell, and I had gone into this particular location and felt quite overwhelmed, and that will be there in the particular show as well. But I didn't know it at the time. It was just this round area, and I'm like, there's something down there, I don't know why, blah blah blah. This is what I'm picking up, blah blah blah.
Yeah. Didn't your sister have to come and help you?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and to find out that that's where she had kept certain people for reportedly, that were displeasing to her. So, and I said, I can see chains and stuff like that, and of course that's where they would have chained them up because there were multiple floors in this particular rounded area, this part of the tower. So just little things like that. But the place itself, it did change, and there was certain areas of it, and like I said, you will have to watch it, but there's certain areas where it just felt uneasy. But yet, and there were other areas I could go into and I could almost roll over and fall asleep in. Yeah. And I think as investigators, we just get to know those kinds of places. Like a location doesn't always have to be 100% every room frightfully horrible. It's literally, there'll be certain sections you'll just be like, yeah, I'm kind of checking out here because there's something doesn't sit right. And that's what it felt like. There were two very prominent locations in that particular spot that felt very uncomfortable. Yeah. Let me just say, it just felt really uncomfortable.
Okay. Well, just before Francis died, he wrote a letter to his best friend George Thurzo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of these right or wrong, so any Hungarians or Slovakians listening and I'm not pronouncing these names right, I do apologise. But he wrote to George, who was his best friend, and he said, I'm dying, please look after Elizabeth for me. Please make sure she's okay. And it's important that I'm telling you this. And what is also interesting is there are reports that when George was still alive, there were certain punishments that would be meted out to servants who did something wrong. Now, supposedly Francis, when he was a big believer in discipline for servants. Now, we're not talking discipline as in docking pay, we are talking discipline as in beating the living daylights out of them and that sort of thing. And there are reports of acceptable medieval servant punishments being things like locking them up in chains in a cellar and starving them for 2 days, that kind of thing. Those were acceptable methods of punishment for unruly servants. But Elizabeth, after her husband died, is meant to have suddenly started to feel her age and started to feel that she was getting old. And the story goes that she was beating a servant who'd displeased her, and some of this servant girl, who was a young teenager's blood had fallen on Elizabeth's hand. And when Elizabeth wiped the blood away, she realised how soft her skin suddenly looked where this blood had landed. And that is supposed to have given her the idea of bathing in the blood of young girls to maintain her youth. And this is one of those, I think, folklore that surrounded Bathory, well, as long as I can remember, ever her first hearing the myth of Bathory, that she used to bathe in the blood of virgins to maintain her youth. Firstly, the amount of blood she would have needed is quite a bit, a bit more than 3 pints or something that the human body carries. But also, as it would have been collected, it would have congealed. It wouldn't have stayed liquid. It would also have gone very cold. It would have probably been like getting into a tub of baked beans. Not to mention, as you said when we were talking, the diseases. It would have been seen as being dangerous to do, I would have thought. From a disease. So even from you look at the mechanics of how to do it, the amount of girls she would have had to bleed at any one time to get enough blood to have a regular bath in it would have been impossible. So there's that.
Absolutely.
There's that. Now, supposedly the villagers, after a few years after Francis had died, started refusing to send their girls up to work at the castle because so many girls had gone missing, supposedly. And Elizabeth didn't have much money, a lot less than people are saying, because Matthias still hadn't paid her back this money he owed her. Now, that is one of the beliefs that's why she was she wasn't actually even arrested at the end of the day, but that's one of the reasons they reckon that she was investigated, because he didn't want to pay that money back. He couldn't, he was broke. The Habsburg court was broke, and it was a lot of money, and she was chasing for it. But she opened what's called a gynoeceum, which basically meant a finishing school for lower nobility. Now, well, I was actually looking up some of the supposed crimes that were levied against her and her 4 servants who did get arrested. And one of them was that they used to daub girls in honey, and naked in honey, and then go outside so that the insects and everything would literally eat them alive. That was one of the punishments. Another one that they would put them in freezing cold water and make them stand outside until they died. Another one was that they would make them hold on to hot pieces of metal until the pain got so much they couldn't. There was other ones, such as they were meant to take off parts of their buttocks and everything and eat them, fry them up and eat them in front of them. All these kind of things, which are pretty horrific, pretty darn horrific. There was also supposedly the fact she wore red because she was so bloodthirsty. Now, I found that red in old Hungarian custom was the equivalent of us wearing black for mourning. Red was actually their colour of mourning. And it was also meant to be a protection from harm. She started wearing red the minute Francis died. So maybe it was because she was bloodthirsty, or maybe she was following custom and wearing red as she was in mourning for her husband. Just a thought. But looking at these permissible servant punishments, daubing someone in honey and letting the insects attack them was actually a crime. It was actually the punishment for when you'd stolen fruit. And there was a court document where she had said that one of her servants stole fruit from her orchards. And they were daubed in honey and left for the insects. There was also the ice bath was meant to be a permissible punishment from Hungarian culture for servants who would complain about everything. A hot coin in the hand, and again there is documented proof that she did actually do this, was if a servant was caught stealing money. You would heat a coin up so it was red hot, and then you would make them hold it in their hand so they were permanently branded for future employers, that they could be seen that they were a thief. I find that quite interesting. That all these punishments did actually have Hungarian custom attached to them, but they were for punishing servants. Now, just throwing it out there, with these servants who died, could it have been that she was metering out the punishments that her and Francis would have meted out before, but maybe she wasn't quite as good at it, and some of them died in the metering out of said punishments?
Well, there is some sort of conspiracy in the sense that her husband had kind of encouraged and or taught her ways to torment and or torture staff and stuff like that who were behaving and things like that. So apparently that's that's kind of one of the theories that they say, that those two have got together and have stayed together and were happy for so long, was the fact that they had a shared love of torture. Pick your interests, people. Please don't make it torture. But anyways,
go and watch football.
Pick something else. Exactly. Yeah. Make it football or something really lovely, but apparently for these people it was torture, and so apparently that was one of those rumored type things where it was like, okay, so she must have been somebody who's grown up, as you said, having had a very interesting childhood, met this guy who obviously was arranged marriage and that kind of stuff, and married quite young according to our society standards. And then when it came to the whole torture thing, it was like, okay, this is how you do it, and that started it, and that's where they had that fused shared interest. And apparently from there on in, when he was away, she apparently had taken on to another level. And particularly after he died, people said like there were reports of some sort from some people saying, oh, we really think there was something wrong, but which in today's standards means, well, she just may have possibly had a mental illness. So
there is that. There's mental illness. I mean, obviously there are reports that she had epilepsy, falling sickness. But it's interesting. We use the word torture, which to us it is torture, what she was doing to them, but to them back then it was acceptable punishment, and it's in the legal documentation from that time that these were acceptable punishments for the crimes that they were committing. So maybe it was that she was enjoying it just a little bit too much, or maybe she just didn't know when to stop, whereas Francis, having been the man of the house, had done it more, therefore knew the boundaries, if you know what I mean, knew when to stop, when it was going to go too far. I don't know. Apparently it was when some of these students from her ladies' finishing school started dying that King Matthias was alerted by lower nobility, saying they weren't happy with this. And of all the people he asked to investigate it, it was the new Palatine, which was George Thurzo, so her husband's best friend. And I think he was in a bit of a tricky position because he had to do what the king was telling him. Yeah, he also had his late best friend who was saying, please look after my wife and my children. Don't let anything bad happen to them. He was in a tricky position. At this point, supposedly, Elizabeth did have a companion living with her, a lady by the name of Anna de Volia. And there is also belief that she was actually the torturess. She was the one who was torturing to the point of killing them, and that she was a witch and all of that kind of thing. Nobody knows, but the name is in history that she lived there, but nobody knows quite how much she was involved. So George had to go and investigate. The king had told him to. It was his job. And one of the accounts is he actually walked in on Elizabeth red-handed, with a couple of girls literally dying and dead in the sort of the cellar basement areas, and her devouring a naked, half-dead serving girl. And that's what he went in his report. What's interesting is he did have other men with him. Not one of them mentioned that. Not one of them. This is the only report that mentioned it. So it does make you wonder if he sort of enhanced things so that he kept in the king's favour. It makes me wonder that. Because what he didn't do, he never arrested Bathory. She never went to court over these crimes. He arrested her 4 servants, and they were tortured. And for anyone who's into the gruesome shit, read up about medieval torture methods. They had three levels of torture. Have you read any of this, Beth?
I have.
Yeah. So the first level was literally going into the torture chamber and seeing what was down there. The second level would have been like thumb screws, literally. So something that's going to hurt, but not too bad. The third level was the one that would, if you got out of that still saying you were innocent, you were normally released. Because we're looking at things like Judas cradles, which I'm not going to describe, but look them up, and something called a choke pear would have been used on the women. Now, a choke... Oh, actually, I'll be honest, I think they got the idea for a speculum when you have to go for a smear test from the choke pear, but... I'm probably going to get people going, Penny! But, you know, anyone who looks at it will know what I'm talking about. But this thing, a choke pear, had many uses. And it could go into any kind of orifice and would open up and rip said orifice. So for someone who was seen to have told lies and stuff, it would go in their mouth. Use your imagination where it would go in other places. But that's one of the torture things they would have used. Now, apparently a lot of people gave in after just seeing the instruments and admitted. Apparently her 4 servants, Iona, Dorothea, Janos and Catalin, were tortured quite heavily before they actually admitted their guilt. And 3 of them were executed. Iona and Dorothea had their fingers ripped out and then they were burnt. And Janos, because he was younger, he was beheaded before he was burnt. George kept to his word, and he didn't arrest Elizabeth. But then again, she also never got a chance to profess her innocence, and she was placed under house arrest for the rest of her life. There are stories that she was bricked in and had only like a letterbox sort of space for food to be passed through. I have found accounts that this wasn't true and that she was basically just kept in her room with a guard on the door to stop her coming out. She survived 3.5 years. She didn't die until the 21st of August 1614, when her guard, noticing she hadn't eaten the food that was left in her doorway, went to check on her and she was dead in her bed. I think that she did kill people, but I don't, because one of the things is supposedly the number of people she's meant to have killed has ranged from anything from 9 to 650. Could you hide 650 bodies?
I think it was a very different time. I mean, again, like we say, there were rumours, particularly when that guy walked in and had seen her mutilating or in the midst of killing somebody. But apparently as he was walking in, there was a body near the door, there was a body near a table, this kind of stuff. So yeah. I think it's very different times. I mean, apparently on the grounds, they would have been sort of thrown and or away and or sort of to decay, that kind of stuff. But then again, people would have words to say about that. Obviously, if you're going up to the castle to have dinner and you're seeing dead bodies decaying on the side, then you'd be having issues. Yeah, it's like, well, is it about the food or is it actually about the hospitality? I'm going to take a hightail and go back. But yeah, it's I think again, it's very, very different times. It is a lot of people. I mean, I think it is. She is rumored to be the worst female serial killer of our time because of that many deaths apparently reported for her to have been overseen or executed in some way. So obviously being the Blood Countess in that regard. Again, like I said, it's very different times. The way that we would conduct investigating and stuff like that is very, very different. It could be possible, but geez, I mean, we're talking 30 odd years, 600 people. If you want to start, I'm terrible at maths, so if you want to break it down in that regard, how many per day, per month, per year, that kind of stuff. Is it possible? Apparently, they said that the graveyards. One report I read was one of the graveyards around the town area was so full that they ended up not being able to use it anymore. And that's hence the reason why it became more difficult for her to be able to hide the bodies of the people or the women that she actually had killed. And it was interesting because there was one particular theory where they said that, obviously they thought, there's some people said, well, we think she was bisexual. She just happened to be, that's how she was built and that's how she was, very frustrated at the fact of her situation. Hence the reason why taking up from a female perspective, because she's grown up in a situation where it was meant to be about guys and being, married to a man and stuff like that. And she had her frustration was taking out on these women and seeing them being tortured made her feel better. That's just an idea, a theory, not taking it as fact at all. As I said, at very different times, like you said, if a female was perceived to have money and power and strength, clearly she was a threat. So, and particularly even with people within our own family, so it doesn't even have to be a threat against people that aren't your family and or friends. You can actually be a threat against people within your own family. If you have a lot of money and power as well. She's meant to be quite powerful at some point at the time, but it is a lot of bodies. But as I said, particularly considering our standard, but I'm 50-50 on it. As I said, I wish I had a time travel machine. I could go back and just go, right, how would you do with this? Like I said, it is a lot of people and so much has been taken from her mythology in the sense of her existence, the whole Dracula drinking blood and keeping young and all this kind of stuff like that has been, sort of almost like fueled by this myth of this particular person, where if we were to have the facts, we could strip it down and really see what the facts were.
Yeah. I mean, I just wonder if it all relates. I do think she and her husband, before he died, tortured their servants, or what we would nickname as torture, which then they would have said was I mean, you only have to look at the fact that 30 years ago it was perfectly acceptable to smack your child if they misbehaved. Now it's seen as being abuse. Look back 500 years and what was acceptable punishment that now we're absolutely horrified at. The other thing I look at is from a biological point of view. If she took that many young girls from the village, how did the village survive? Because there would have been no girls having children, therefore to keep the village numbers. And I couldn't find any records that the population of the village suffered. So there's that as well. Also, I just wonder if maybe the blood thing came out because if she was epileptic, because if the cure for the treatment for epilepsy back then was to rub the blood of a non-sufferer on your lips, someone shouted, "We need blood," or she said, "I need blood." And that just was snowballed. Maybe she felt she had to have blood ready just in case she had a fit, so someone was carrying it around with them. I know this is all conjecture and speculation, but I just don't know how she would have got away with it, or why, there hadn't been. it just doesn't make sense to me. But I mean, it's like with they weren't concerned until nobility started complaining about her.
Yeah.
Now, back then, you didn't have mains drainage, you didn't have mains running water, a lot of diseases, lots of people in a close proximity in a castle. One of them gets ill because her sort of, apparently she said when they questioned her about all the deaths of the nobility, well, they died of illness, but she couldn't prove it. I just wonder if she'd gone to court, if it would have been different. But because if she'd gone to court, that meant she would have lost her son Paul would have lost his estate. The name would have been, both the Bathory and the Nadasdy name would have been blackened. So George Thurzo kind of did a good thing by sort of saying to her, look, take house arrest, and it doesn't go any further. Your kids still keep their name, you still keep the castle, but you don't leave it ever again. I suppose he was stuck between a rock and a hard place, but I just... And the fact that you said that the whole thing doesn't feel ominous, it's only those one particular couple of areas.
Yes.
It could have been some serving girls were imprisoned down there because they were being punished. And the torture went too far. The punishment, aka torture, whatever you want to call it, just went too far, and they were terrified. You would be I mean, I'm sorry, if I was having to hold on to a hot coin, I would be terrified if someone was beating me with. And some of the torture things they did do to them were pretty, the licensed torture was pretty harsh. You would be terrified.
But wasn't there was meant to be up to almost like over 100 or a couple of hundred apparently, testimony from people saying, yep, she was a very bad person. The way that she conducted her business and her staff and all that kind of stuff, it was terribly, she treated people like crap, all that kind of stuff, and it was beyond what we thought. And then when you dig a little deeper, you realize the fact that those people that had given this testimony, when they started to actually dig a bit deeper, because obviously these women were missing and they were trying to find a reason why, when they dug a little bit deeper and stuff like that, they found out it's like, oh, actually, hang on. She's like, how can I put it? Oh, God, what's the words? When they dug, oh, God, what's the words?
I don't know what word you're trying to think of.
I know, I was thinking, what's the best terminology for this? When they dug around and found the fact that, it's under torture, under duress, that kind of stuff. So that's it. Oh my God! Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. So yeah, it's under duress. So in other words, but the thing is, in today's
at night where you are, it's 10 p.m. at night.
I know. It's Australia. We're in the future. It's fabulous over here. It's awesome. But yeah, future flying. But yeah, it was. But in today's society, if somebody's tortured and then gives evidence upon that, we don't take it because the brain is very different and the way in which our bodies work. But yet there was apparently hundreds of people who had given
testimonies.
Exactly, who have, and quite a lot of that, and quite a large percentage of that has been done over duress, which means torture,
or the threat of torture, or knowing that someone's being tortured in the next room. Yeah, that none of them were what you'd class as true witness statements.
Exactly. So then, where do we exactly? So do we do, like you said, with the whole medieval way of it? Like, what do we really take from that?
Yeah, so the king's sort of judge is sitting, the sheriff is sitting there with you saying, did she do it? The king's direct sheriff. You're not going to, and you for, they don't say, so what did she, now did she do it? You can word it so that they're not going to go against what the king's wanting. The king wanted to find her guilty. Now, whether the king wanted to find her guilty so he didn't have to pay her the debt back, that's one of the theories. Do I think she abused people? Yes, in today's society, yes, she did. She was abusive. Do I think she is misunderstood? To a point. Do I think she was utter evil? No. No, I think she was a product of her time. But do I think she was an actual... I think it would what we'd be called today, and I presume you have it in Australia. She would be classed as manslaughter.
Yeah,
Not,
that's what we have here.
Yeah, not murder, manslaughter.
Yeah.
So, is she a killer? Yes. Is she the worst serial killer in history? No. Is she the first ever female serial killer? No. I don't think so. I personally don't think so. But I do think she killed people. But I don't think... Because the other interesting thing I found, and it'd be good if someone finds somebody to contradict this, they don't actually have the names of the servants she's supposed to have killed. Now, surely if your daughter had gone to work there and never came home, you'd be able to give her name to the courts, wouldn't you?
But then again, it's very different times and depends on what class that particular female was in.
Possibly.
You know what I mean? Even if it, from a working perspective, it's almost like you don't even matter.
No, but what I'm saying is if you had said to the courts, like, my child went missing when they were there, and there's no names of any of the supposed missing women, the nobility ones or the servants, no names. There's also meant to be a diary that Elizabeth kept, and where I think this is slightly myth because nobody's ever been able to find it. It's always like, it's a bit like sort of searching for the Holy Grail. Some people say it's being held here, some people say it's being held there. The only thing they have actually seen were letters that she wrote to Francis when he was away fighting. And they were all very typical of the time and very sort of actually quite loving for the nobility as well. So I think it is going to be one of those unanswered. There's those people who think she's guilty as sin. I don't know. I thought she was before I started doing this. But I'm 70-30 the other way now.
So where do you think she's buried?
Well, see, that's the other one, isn't it? That the villagers didn't want her buried. Supposedly, the villagers didn't want her buried in their graveyard because they didn't want anything to do with her. Now, was that because they felt that it would upset the king by her being buried there? Or was it the fact they genuinely thought she was a vampire? I don't know. I don't know where she's buried.
Well, as I said, they as recent as 1995 when I think they tried to exhume, the crypt, and they weren't. She wasn't there. No. No one knows where she is.
Gut feeling, she's still in the castle.
You reckon? Oh, don't say that to me now.
Well, you're not there now, so I can say no. Gut feeling. I think she's still at the castle. I think she's buried in the grounds of the castle.
Oh gosh.
Well, I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. That was our home. Still is.
It's an incredible place.
It's interesting that you say that the whole thing doesn't feel scary. It's just a couple of little areas.
No.
Because to me,
it is just still areas, yeah.
Yeah, if it was a place where loads of murders had been committed and bodies were buried all over the place, you know, you probably...
But then again...
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. But then again, there's been places where I've been to where I've been in jails here in Australia, and there's certain areas that I feel like I feel intense or more intense in, and there are other areas I could literally just curl up and fall asleep in.
Yeah.
So there's that too. But
there is that. But it's well worth watching the film on Amazon. We will post a link to it for anyone who wants to download it. I watched it, and it also covers Chernobyl as well, which obviously Beth and I spoke about last year when we did our first show together, when I had to teach myself how to become a nuclear scientist in 2 days.
Done more than me.
It was an interesting experience, I tell you. But I'm sure Beth will be back later on this year because we do enjoy chat. Maybe we'll talk about somewhere in Australia next, Beth.
I think so. Well, it could be Wellington for all we know.
It could be Wellington, which we were actually talking about before we started recording. So, which blew my mind when Beth told me that from side to side of the state of New South Wales, it's about a 10-hour drive. And I said to her, that's longer than me going from the bottom of England to the top of England, Britain, from the bottom to the top. So it's quite mind blowing. But when you get your pilot's license, I'll come out for a fly with you.
Yeah, hopefully I won't crash, but yeah, that's good.
So what projects have you got coming up at the moment, my dear?
Well, I'm working on a research paper for a particular experiment idea that I've got about sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
As I said, I've got to find some willing participants, which, let's just face it, let's just pick anybody from the rat race, really. But
anyone with a baby, any paranormal investigators, yeah, they all suffer with it all the time anyway.
Exactly. Do you hallucinate when you've had little sleep? Yes, you do.
Yes.
So they'll be...
Yes, I hear things and see things. Yes.
So it's a bit of research in that sort of thing. So that's kind of what the angle I'm taking with that. I'm also looking at finally, because I've had a lot of people ask, writing a book as well. Eventually.
Good.
Oh my goodness! So I've got to start on that. So it's kind of like just if you want to do it, start it kind of stuff. And
you got to start. You won't finish unless you
gosh,
start.
yes. Yep. Absolutely. And of lots of wonderful events that I'm doing all around the country, and also ones I want to go to. I'm eyeing off sage.co.uk as far as an event. Yes, nice. Yes. So
you'll love where it's held. You'll love that place.
Oh my gosh! Don't say that. I won't leave. I'm eyeballing it like nothing. So lots of different places like that.
It's a weirdly phenomenal place, I tell you. It's
fabulous.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
cannot wait.
Well, thank you so much for staying up to talk to us.
Oh, that's lovely.
Really appreciated it. That's Beth Darlington of Access Paranormal. You can find her on Facebook, Twitter. I think you're on Instagram as well, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
YouTube. And
yes,
anyway,
YouTube.
Just type in Access Paranormal and you'll find my girl. You'll find the Darlo. And
yes.
all her research and all the places she's going to. But I'm sure Beth will be back later on this year, and we'll talk about somewhere that's in Australia. By which point you'll probably have come back to London by that point as well. Thanks again, Beth. It's great to be back, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to tonight's Haunted Histories on Countess Bathory. Let me know if you think she did it based on the sort of information that we've talked about. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'd be interested to hear. But until next week, my friends, this is me signing off. But have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.